Am 19. November 2019 wurde der Informationsraum von einer Nachricht erschüttert, die vom Gelände der Canterbury Christ Church University in der Grafschaft Kent kam. Archäologen, die Ausgrabungen auf universitätseigenem Boden durchführten, entdeckten ein unberührtes Grab, das sofort die Aufmerksamkeit der Forschenden auf sich zog. In der Grabstätte befanden sich die sterblichen Überreste einer jungen Frau, die dem angelsächsischen Adel angehörte. Ihr hoher Status zeigte sich deutlich an den Beigaben für ihre letzte Reise: eine Halskette aus seltenem Bernstein und Glasperlen, ein Gürtel mit einer kunstvoll gefertigten Schnalle aus Kupferlegierung sowie ein Eisenmesser, ein Gegenstand, der zu jener Zeit als Zeichen von Wohlstand galt. Nach einer sorgfältigen Analyse der gefundenen Artefakte datierten Experten das Grab in die Zeit zwischen 500 und 600 nach Christus. Historiker gehen davon aus, dass diese unbekannte Frau eine Zeitgenossin des legendären Königs von Kent, Ethelbert, und seiner Gemahlin Königin Bertha war. Man nimmt an, dass sich die Erde über ihren Grab vor etwa 1400 Jahren geschlossen hat. Eine derart präzise Datierung wirft jedoch bei einigen Skeptikern Fragen auf, denn die schriftliche Geschichte Britanniens, auf die sich die Wissenschaft stützt, wurde erst im 18. Jahrhundert systematisiert, auf Grundlage von Handschriften aus dem 11. Jahrhundert. Authentische Dokumente aus dem 7. Jahrhundert sind kaum erhalten geblieben, insgesamt existieren nur 3 Manuskripte. Doch unser Interesse gilt hier weniger den Streitigkeiten über die Regierungszeiten halblegendärer Könige, als vielmehr einem ganz bestimmten Objekt, das in diesem alten Grab gefunden wurde.
Jedná se o stříbrnou terčovou brož, vykládanou polodrahokami, granáty. Tento šperk, který ležel v zemi téměř 1,5 tisíce let, nese symbol, jenž nelze zaměnit s žádným jiným. Na zlatožlutém pozadí je jasně vidět purpurový trojlístek. Geometrie a barevnost tohoto motivu jsou pro moderního člověka až bolestně povědomé. Jde o přesnou kopii symbolu nebezpečí radiace, znaku, který byl podle oficiální verze historie vytvořen teprve v polovině 20. století.
Es gilt als gesichert, dass das erste Warnzeichen vor Strahlung im Jahr 1946 im Radiation Laboratory der University of California in Berkeley entstand. Ursprünglich zeigte es ein purpurnes Dreiblatt auf blauem Hintergrund. Die Farbwahl war kein Zufall. Dieser Magentaton wurde in der Laborkennzeichnung kaum verwendet und kollidierte nicht mit anderen Markierungen. Der blaue Hintergrund erwies sich jedoch als unglücklich, da er unter künstlicher Beleuchtung schlecht wahrnehmbar war. 2 Jahre später, 1948, verbesserten Mitarbeiter des Oak Ridge National Laboratory das Design. Sie schnitten das purpurne Symbol aus und legten es auf Karten in verschiedenen Farben, um die Sichtbarkeit aus einer Entfernung von 6 Metern zu testen. Als auffälligste und alarmierendste Kombination erwies sich ein purpurnes oder schwarzes Dreiblatt auf leuchtend gelbem Grund. Und genau hier verbirgt sich das unglaubliche Rätsel. Die Kent-Fibel, gefertigt von einem Handwerker im 6. Jahrhundert, stimmt in Farbgebung und Form perfekt mit dem Standard überein, der 1948 in den USA festgelegt wurde. Die Granate erzeugen genau jenen purpurnen Farbton, während die goldene Basis der Fibel die Rolle des gelben Warnhintergrunds übernimmt. Die Wahrscheinlichkeit eines solchen Zufalls ist verschwindend gering. Bevor wir versuchen, dieses Geheimnis zu entschlüsseln und zu verstehen, woher antike Goldschmiede das Wissen um ein Symbol unsichtbarer Gefahr haben könnten, abonnieren Sie unbedingt den Kanal und geben Sie ein Like. Die Informationen, die wir gleich betrachten, könnten Ihr Bild vom technischen Fortschritt der Vergangenheit völlig auf den Kopf stellen.
How is it even possible that a design born from experiments in secret laboratories of the atomic age could adorn the chest of a woman who lived in the age of swords and bows? Does history really move in a spiral, with us merely repeating what was already known to our ancestors? Or perhaps this symbol meant the same thing in ancient times as it does today, a warning about an energy capable of both giving warmth and bringing destruction. The answer to this question may lie not in the distant past, but in a much closer era, where traces of forgotten technologies were literally hiding in plain sight. Let us pause and consider how unbelievable this coincidence really is. When in 1946, a group of researchers in Berkeley developed a visual code for an invisible threat, they were guided by strict logic and the results of optical tests. They needed a signal the human eye would catch instantly, one that would not be lost against laboratory equipment and would be clearly associated with danger. The evolution of the sign from purple on blue to the canonical black or purple trefoil on bright yellow was dictated purely by the laws of visual psychology and color physics. It was a product of the industrial era, the result of a scientific search for the perfect warning. And yet, decades after this standard was approved, we find an absolutely identical image, executed with jeweler's precision, but dated to what we call the Dark Ages. An Anglo-Saxon craftsman of the 6th century, creating a brooch with garnet inlays, reproduced exactly the same colors and geometry. The likelihood that an ancient jeweler and modern scientists independently arrived at the same complex symbol, a purple trefoil on a yellow field, approaches zero. This forces us to look at the find from a completely different angle. What if this ornament was not a product of artistic imagination, but a copy of something the craftsman had seen with his own eyes? Perhaps it was an attempt to capture a marking on devices or objects whose meaning was later lost or misunderstood by descendants. Here we step onto shaky ground in official historiography. We are told that the woman was buried in the 600s, but what is this certainty based on? The foundation of British history as we know it today was laid only in the 18th century. Historians of that era relied on manuscripts from the 11th century, the originals of which have barely survived. There are only 3 documentary sources dated directly to the 7th century, and their authenticity and interpretation are still disputed. This means that a vast stretch of time, known as Early English history, is effectively a literary reconstruction written centuries later. In such an informational vacuum, it is easy to hide or distort the true state of affairs. If we allow for the possibility that the chronology was shifted or rewritten, then the presence of a radiation symbol in an ancient burial ceases to be a curiosity. It may point to the fact that humanity had already encountered technologies of matter splitting or powerful radiation long before the discovery of uranium. The symbol on the brooch may have served as a talisman copying a sign of power, or as a mark of belonging to a caste that dealt with this deadly yet great energy. If a radiation warning symbol existed in the 6th century and was then reinvented in the 20th, it suggests a cyclical nature of history, that we are merely rediscovering forgotten knowledge of our ancestors. However, to find confirmation of this bold hypothesis, we do not need to dive so deep into the distant past. Traces of mysterious technologies using unfamiliar principles of energy can be found much closer to our time. If we look carefully at everyday objects and architecture of the 19th century, we may discover that many things we consider primitive or purely decorative actually served an entirely different function. Most astonishing of all, these artifacts were right in front of everyone's eyes, yet their true purpose was forgotten or deliberately concealed behind the facade of the coal and oil age. If we turn our attention to the material culture of the 19th century, we encounter striking technical inconsistencies that modern history prefers to ignore or dismiss as design quirks of the past. In antique shops and old mansions, one can still find heating devices whose very existence contradicts the official narrative of energy development. We are talking about magnificent cast iron stoves and fireplaces of the Victorian era, whose construction baffles any competent thermal engineer. These massive, richly decorated devices often have no chimneys or flues for removing combustion products at all. This raises an obvious question. How could one burn coal or wood indoors without ventilation and not die instantly from carbon monoxide poisoning? It is physically impossible. Unless their operating principle was completely different and did not involve burning organic fuel. Moreover, the fireboxes of many such units are so small and awkward that even wood chips barely fit inside, let alone full logs or coal. Loading fuel into such openings would be torture, and combustion efficiency would be negligible. Yet the exterior design of these stoves is astonishing. Intricate cast patterns coexist with strange metal finials shaped like vases, goblets, and spires. These elements, which we now see as decoration, structurally resemble resonators or receiving antennas. Some models still retain adjustment knobs made with a precision more typical of 20th century instrumentation than crude 19th century casting. These rotary mechanisms often have scales or paired dots, remarkably similar to modern thermostats or power regulators on electrical devices. One gets the strong impression that these stoves did not burn matter, but were tuned to a certain frequency or energy flow, converting it into heat. The most intriguing detail linking these artifacts into a single system is the labeling. On the cast iron doors and bodies of these devices, one word appears with striking regularity: radium, or its derivatives such as ray or radiant. And this occurs at a time when the chemical element radium had not yet been officially discovered, or was only beginning its journey in closed laboratories. Why did manufacturers mass-produce stoves named after one of the rarest and, as we now know, radioactive metals? The answer may lie in a very telling cartoon from the early 20th century that has miraculously survived to this day and serves as a true manifesto of that era. In this satirical image, we see oil magnate John Rockefeller huddled with his powerful friends around a primitive stove, trying to keep warm. In another part of the scene, Steel King Andrew Carnegie is desperately burning stacks of valuable bonds just to get some heat, while an ordinary family in the left corner is forced to break up and burn its own furniture. These are vivid images of an energy crisis and total dependence on fossil fuels. But in the upper right corner, the cartoonist depicts a completely calm person, comfortably warming himself by a strange device. There is no fire or coal inside it. It simply emits a soft, steady glow. And on top of it is a clear label: radium. This person depends neither on coal monopolies, nor oil prices, nor firewood supplies. The artist clearly contrasts the old world, based on burning finite resources, with a new, or perhaps well-forgotten old, world of clean, fuel-free energy. The name radium here is obviously not used to denote a dangerous isotope, but as a synonym for a heat source operating on a different, radiant principle. This suggests that in the 19th century, the word radium had a completely different everyday meaning that was later replaced. After all, if these stoves were truly packed with radioactive ore, their owners would not have lived a year. Yet these devices stood in homes for decades, warming entire generations. This means that under the radium brand was a technology that was accessible and safe, but later displaced and forgotten. Why then was a word we now associate with deadly danger once written on the most ordinary household appliances, even before scientists began talking about radiation? And what did it really mean to people of that era? The beginning of the 20th century was marked by a phenomenon that, from today's perspective, looks like a mass lapse of reason or a grand social experiment. It was a time when a mysterious substance, only recently named, became not just a scientific discovery, but an omnipresent brand, a symbol of progress and exclusivity. Shop shelves and pharmacies overflowed with products proudly labeled radium. And these were not specialized industrial goods hidden behind thick lead walls. Radium entered every home, penetrated the most intimate areas of human life, and became part of the daily routine for millions. The marketing of that era was aggressive and mesmerizing. Manufacturers eagerly offered toothpaste that supposedly made smiles glow in the dark, and soap that promised to wash away not only dirt, but years from one's face. Chocolate infused with radium was marketed as a gourmet treat for restoring strength, while drinking water saturated with radioactive isotopes was advertised as an elixir of immortality. Advertising brochures called radium liquid sunlight and the builder of life, bestowed by nature itself. It was believed that this element charged the body's cells with unprecedented energy, stimulated circulation, and granted eternal youth. Housewives bought special clay dishware, doctors prescribed radioactive compresses, and cosmetic giants released powders and creams guaranteeing a velvety glow. Amid this carnival of madness, one device stands apart, something that breaks the pattern of quack products and brings us back to the topic of forgotten technologies. We are talking about a portable heating pad produced by a company in Michigan called X-Radium. Unlike creams and pastes, where the presence of an active ingredient could not be verified without instruments, this device had a clear measure of functionality. It either heated or it did not. Its advertising contained a claim that completely contradicts modern combustion physics, requires no fuel. The description stated that the stamped vessel was filled with a special substance that attracted heat rays from space and retained them. If this were a scam, it would have been exposed on the first cold evening. But if the device worked, it means that at the time, the word radium referred to something other than a chemical element. This raises the central question. Was this mass obsession a result of ignorance, or are we witnessing a deliberate substitution of concepts? The Latin root of the word means ray or radiation. It is quite possible that before chemical nomenclature was officially established, the term radium referred to any technology involving radiant energy, the very atmospheric electricity or ether we discussed earlier. Manufacturers of eternal heaters used an old term to describe a principle based on concentrating diffuse energy. But with the appearance of a new dangerous element, a linguistic trap was set. The concept of safe, radiant heat was deliberately mixed with a radioactive isotope. People were made to believe that the energy source was a rare and expensive dust, rather than an omnipresent field. We are told that radium was simply a dangerous chemical element discovered by a great female scientist through heroic suffering. Official science claims that Marie Curie gave this substance to the world, paying for the discovery with her health. But if we look closely at the canonical story of her life and work, setting aside emotional reverence, the neat legend begins to crumble, revealing numerous inconsistencies and logical contradictions. The story of Marie Curie's scientific heroism, taught to us from school, upon closer inspection begins to resemble a carefully staged drama, where facts give way to emotional impact. We are vividly told about the conditions in which the work to isolate the new element was carried out. Not in a modern laboratory with ventilation and shielding, but essentially in an abandoned shed on Rue Le Monde in Paris. This space, previously used as a medical morgue and later as a warehouse, was completely unsuitable for precise scientific research. In summer, it was unbearably hot. In winter, freezing cold. And the roof leaked so badly that dripping water had to be collected in buckets. The renowned chemist Wilhelm Ostwald, who visited the site, later wrote that it was something between a stable and a potato cellar, and had he not seen chemical apparatus, he would have taken it for a cruel joke. It was in this radioactive stable that Marie Curie spent the best years of her life performing back-breaking physical labor. To obtain mere traces of the new substance, she had to process tons of pitchblende. waste from ore production brought from Bohemia. Day after day, she personally stirred boiling masses in huge cast iron cauldrons, using an iron rod nearly as tall as herself. The space had no ventilation, and toxic fumes saturated with heavy metals and radioactive radon gas filled the air. She breathed this lethal mixture for years. Her clothes, hair, and skin were soaked with dust, now considered one of the most dangerous substances on the planet. Here we encounter the main medical paradox that cannot be explained by modern radiobiology. We know radiation is merciless. Radiation sickness, tissue necrosis, and cancer are inevitable at high doses. Other researchers of the time, such as Friedrich Giesel or Otto Volkoff, suffered severe burns and inflammation simply from holding a vial of radium salts or briefly applying it to the skin. Their wounds took weeks to heal. Marie, however, lived at the epicenter of this radiation constantly. Yet she not only survived, but remained active. Moreover, at the height of this work, in 1903, while pregnant, she went on a cycling trip. In 1904, she gave birth to a completely healthy daughter, Eve, who later lived to be 102 years old. Marie Curie herself died only at the age of 66, an astonishing longevity for someone who supposedly inhaled tons of radioactive ore. How can such selectivity of radiation be explained? Why did a substance whose micrograms killed others spare a woman who worked with it using shovels and crowbars in an unventilated shed? This glaring inconsistency makes us wonder, perhaps this heroic epic was greatly exaggerated or even invented after the fact. Maybe the concentration of dangerous substances was not what we are told, or perhaps the very nature of her work was something else entirely. The story of a self-sacrificing woman who laid down her life on the altar of science for a pinch of glowing powder was perfect for creating a new myth. Why was such a loud, global PR campaign around the discovery of a new chemical element even necessary? Before that, discoveries were made quietly within the scientific community, without involving housewives or chocolate manufacturers. Perhaps this informational noise was artificially created to drown out and replace something else, something that also bore the name radium, but had a completely different nature and purpose than a dangerous metal in the periodic table. All these seemingly disconnected facts, from the strange symbol on an ancient brooch to the inexplicable construction of Victorian stoves, and the marketing frenzy of the early 20th century, come together into a single unsettling picture. We stand on the brink of realizing that in the 19th century, there may have existed a global energy system, actively functioning, whose principles today are considered fantasy or pseudoscience. We are talking about drawing energy literally from the air, about technologies using atmospheric electricity, or, as scientists of the past called it, ether. This energy was ubiquitous, wireless, and, most importantly for those in power, practically free. Here lies the solution to the greatest linguistic trick in human history. The word radium was not originally the name of a chemical element. In Latin, it means ray, radiance, emission. Engineers and ordinary people of the past used this term to describe the very process of obtaining and concentrating that etheric energy. Stoves marked radium were not miniature nuclear reactors. They were receivers that captured and converted wave radiation into heat. The purple trefoil on a yellow background, which we now see as a warning of invisible death, may, for people of earlier eras, from Anglo-Saxons to 19th century citizens, have simply been a technical marking indicating the presence of an active energy field, or a node connected to a global network. Such freedom, however, could not suit emerging transnational corporations and centralized governments. A world where every home is autonomous and receives heat and light from space for free cannot be controlled. You cannot install a meter on ether. You cannot shut off atmospheric electricity for non-payment. To build an empire based on coal, oil, and gas, It was necessary not just to offer an alternative, but to destroy the memory of old technologies, to make them impossible, forbidden. A global operation of forgetting began, aimed at putting humanity on the needle of paid resources and making everyone dependent on a central supply. This is precisely why a grand informational campaign around Marie Curie's discovery was needed. The story of heroically extracting radium from ore became the perfect cover. A new, rare, and extremely dangerous chemical element was deliberately given the old familiar name, radium. It was a substitution of concepts on a colossal scale. Through newspapers, magazines, and the Nobel Committee, a new message was implanted in people's minds. Radium is rare chemistry obtained through titanic labor, not accessible heat. The meaning of the word was rewritten. Now, when people heard radium, they imagined not the cozy warmth of a woodless hearth, but horrific burns, medical experiments, and glowing dials. Old fuel-free stoves were outlawed, confiscated, or converted to primitive coal burning, which explains their strange fireboxes without chimneys. And the majestic spires, domes, and metal grills on the roofs of cathedrals and old mansions, which once served as receiving antennas of this global network, turned in the eyes of descendants into meaningless architectural decoration. We walk among the ruins of a highly developed civilization, mistaking complex technical devices for ornament, and pay enormous sums for resources our ancestors may have taken for free. The great substitution succeeded. Technologies of freedom were erased, replaced by an era of meters, wires, and pipes. We have traveled a long and winding investigative path that began with a single, seemingly insignificant find in the county of Kent. Who could have imagined that a silent artifact from a 6th century burial, a silver brooch with garnets, would become the key that opens the door to a forbidden history of technology? This object, which survived the Dark Ages, invisibly linked the era of ancient kings with the Industrial Revolution of the 19th century and the atomic age of the 20th. The purple trefoil on a golden background ceased to be just a random ornament or a jeweler's whim. We saw in it a technical marking, a sign of a force that ran through centuries until it was violently erased from human memory. This story clearly showed us the mechanism of global substitution. We traced how perfectly functioning devices, Victorian stoves and fireplaces that required no fuel, were turned into museum exhibits with incorrect labels. We saw how the word radium, which once meant light and free energy, was skillfully recoded into a synonym for invisible threat and fatal danger. Behind this linguistic operation loom the silhouettes of those interested in establishing a monopoly on resources. Coal and oil magnates, building empires on burning matter, could not allow a competitor in the form of omnipresent ether. They needed to erase knowledge of the past to build a future where every kilowatt of heat has a price, and autonomy is deemed impossible. The tragic and heroic figure of Marie Curie unknowingly became the perfect tool in this game. Her discovery provided a pretext to rewrite the dictionary and frighten the population into voluntarily abandoning the legacy of their ancestors. We live in a world built on the ruins of a highly developed civilization, but we have been taught to see these ruins as mere beautiful architecture or primitive cult structures. Cathedral spires that may have been electrical receivers became religious symbols, and complex resonators became simple decor. This leads us to a dizzying question whose scale is hard to grasp. How many other technologies of the past are hidden under the guise of myths, legends, or historical errors? If we were lied to about the nature of heat and light, what else is an illusion? Perhaps our history textbooks are nothing more than a collection of coordinated fictions designed to hide the fact that we are not progressing, but simplifying and losing great knowledge. We look at pyramids, star forts, ancient temples, and see only stones. while they may be parts of gigantic machines whose principles are no longer accessible to us. Our investigation is only an attempt to lift the veil on one of thousands of mysteries. The world around us is full of traces of a different intelligence, a different approach to life, more harmonious and free. To see it, all we need to do is stop taking official interpretations on faith and start asking uncomfortable questions. If you found it interesting to touch these forgotten technologies and want to learn more about what the pages of official history hide from us, be sure to watch the 2 videos now appearing on your screen. In them, we explore other equally fascinating historical mysteries and inconsistencies that cannot be ignored. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new investigations. We are only just beginning to uncover the true face of our past.